Evening, everyone. Welcome for those of you who are returning to part two of this series, which is centered around influencing the development of positive nutrition behaviors in your training environment. For those of you who are new, so this is the second part of our first series, which happened 2 weeks ago. So it's a nutrition focused webinar with some like a behavioral underpinning to it. So I'll just get going with some housekeeping before we get started on the content, just while a few more people filter in. So for those of you who didn't join last time, my name is Eoghan Hickey and I'm one of the performance nutrition team, currently working in Sport Wales. Also on the call we have Sarah Carville, who is one of the performance psychology team. So she'll be helping me out with some of the question and answer function in the background today. And also we have Liz Davies from Welsh Athletics on the call for the purposes of technical support. So hopefully we won't need her assistance and everything will run smoothly, but she's in the background just in case. Just another couple of points. So everyone that's not familiar with this format, you've been placed on mute as default. This is just purely to minimize any background noise or interference from your end, so I come across as clearly as possible, and just for bandwidth purposes, so that everything hopefully is coming through smoothly on your end. If you can't hear me or see the screen, if anyone's having any issues like that, just feel free to pop it into the question/chat box function that you've got, and that will get picked up. And yeah, lastly, I'd like to say we're going to be, there's an interactive element, same as the first webinar. So we'll be asking you guys to ponder and think about a couple of things as we move through the webinar. So if you could please feel free, and we would encourage you to use the questions box that you've got available on your dashboard. And we'll get to those either during the webinar or at the end. If there's anything relevant, Sarah will pick it up. So it's just gone roughly a couple of minutes past 7 now. So I'm just going to start with some of the aims and outcomes as a few more people filter into the webinar, and we'll get going. Oops, sorry. Yeah, so just for those of you who are joining for the first time, some of the aims and outcomes of the series, which were discussed in part one. So part one was really centered around discussing why nutrition matters for athlete health and performance as sort of an overarching theme to the content that we're delivering today. And also just to develop your own awareness, whether you're a coach, parent, club coordinator, or facilitator, around understanding the influences that underpin the nutrition behaviors that we're speaking about. And then, so that was in the last webinar, and then today the main focus, as we have some continuity from that, is to explore how the training environment can support those optimal nutrition choices and give you some hopefully really practical take-home examples that you can apply in your own club and training environments moving forward. So just wanted to get started on, which is a really powerful example from our part one webinar of this series, which was when we asked you as an audience to think about some of the examples of positive nutrition behaviors that you see, hear and feel in your own training environments. And as you can see, using the Menti software, we got some really nice examples of different aspects that you'd see. So things like eating healthy snacks between meals, eating regular meals throughout the day, having a pre-run snack as a fuel, maintaining adequate hydration, getting your 5-a-day fruit and veg. So all these really nice examples of the behaviors that as either coaches, parents or athletes we come to expect and we want to sort of underpin for both training and for performance. So yeah, that's just some really good examples, and it was really great to see that you guys grasped what we were looking for in terms of the behaviors that you're likely to see and what you want to see from your athletes. That's really important point to sort of underpin a lot of what we're going to discuss today. And again, this is a more of a recap slide on the previous webinar, but just to discuss the three main themes of behavior that we're going to be talking around practical examples today, which is around capability to perform a behavior, the motivation to perform the desired behavior, and what is the athlete's opportunity to perform the desired nutrition behavior. And within those three, there's two sort of strands or aspects to each one, and I'll just touch again on them briefly for those of you who didn't get to attend in part one. So under capability, it's split into your physical skills and your psychological capability. So at the top there with the little chef icon, you've got obviously the athlete's ability to prepare and cook their own meals, which is something that's often developed through childhood and adolescence, and they bring that then into their adult careers. And then underneath you've got the psychological capability. So this is the one that most people are really familiar with. So an athlete knowing how much carbohydrate they need to fuel a session, an athlete knowing how much they need to drink throughout the day in terms of milliliters of fluid, all that nitty gritty bits of nutrition information that you'd expect to see in a typical like nutrition 101 presentation. Then we move on to motivation first. So at the top, you've got your reflective motivation. So this is underpinning the nutrition choices that would underpin an athlete's core goals from a performance, health and performance point of view. So where does nutrition fit into their overall goals and aims, and what nutrition processes and goals do they have themselves as an athlete, or what does the coach set for them as those behaviors and expectations they want to see daily and weekly and building into a training block. And then underneath, where you see the two sort of smiling and frowning emojis, there is more around the automatic motivation. So when an athlete experiences emotional disturbances for whatever reason, extreme highs and lows of competing, can they still adhere to those good nutrition behaviors that we would expect to see of them? And what are their own, what is the athlete's identity, and how does that manifest itself from a nutrition point of view with the behavior side of things? And then lastly, opportunity, again, similar to capability, you've got physical first at the top. So that's purely just what does the environment look like for the athlete? So when they're in the training environment, is there anything in terms of food provision? Is there a cafe? Is there a tuck shop? Is there a supermarket nearby where it's really convenient for them to go and pick up some healthy snacks for fueling or recovering a particular session? And what's the sort of context behind the environment that they normally find themselves in? And then also under opportunity, you've got the social opportunity. So that's their peer network. Everyone from fellow athletes to more senior athletes to the coaches in particular can be a huge influence here. Obviously parents as well. So are these key messages, etc., being reinforced, or are they getting mixed messages? And how does that sort of manifest itself in their sort of social aspect of their training and their lifestyle as well? And then just a nice quote really, which underpins the sort of holistic element to all of this, where typically the fundamental belief about the role of information and knowledge in determining behavior is wrong and unscientific. So simply giving people information doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to change their behavior. So it's really drawing reference to that sort of traditional approach of the bottom left-hand side of capability, where the expectation is if you just tell the athlete what they should be eating and give them the details and the plans, like a meal plan and some guidelines around that they should just follow it and perform those desired behaviors. And as you can see, just from even this broad overview, which I'll be going into a bit more detail, it's definitely not as straightforward as that. You really need to consider the athlete as an individual and consider what barriers and enablers they have outside of just information to performing those nutrition behaviors we're going to talk about a bit more. So this was one for anyone that was returning from part one of this series. We asked you guys to think about, between webinars, what are the possibilities that you would consider to influence positive nutrition behaviors in your own club or training environment? And for those who are thinking a little bit about what the image means underneath, if you haven't if that hasn't resonated with you, it's really just what's the low-hanging fruit for you. What do you see as either a really big barrier or something that really helps you in the training environment? So it can be anything from the physical environment and what you see in terms of, the shops and the catering provision that's around, or the social opportunity we mentioned around other athletes and coach influences, or it can be motivation. So yeah, we asked you guys to have a think about what you're seeing from that point of view, and is there anything that you see as like low-hanging fruit that it's definitely something to consider, and then we'll go into a bit more detail in the webinar around the different approaches that you can take to sort of tackling some of these issues. So if anyone has anything that comes to mind straight away when we reference this low-hanging fruit, feel free to put it in the question and chat box now if you have a minute. Hopefully we might get one or two useful examples through. So I'll just give you guys maybe just a minute or two if anyone can think, again, specifically their own training environment and what they're seeing, hearing and feeling. Can you think of any opportunities to sort of influence good nutrition outside of just like we said, the traditional, give them the information and hope that they will change their behavior? So yeah, if anything comes through on your end, Sarah, just feel free to feed it in, or if something comes in a bit later on, that's fine, we can pick it up.
Yeah, we've just had one come through, which is a great one. Do some practicals as a team building.
Yeah, absolutely.
It could be online or in person, they've said.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a really nice example, and probably one that's really relevant at the minute when you say, online or in person. There's been a lot of examples of, say, doing like virtual, cook along sessions or like practical workshops like that has more of a team bonding and development aspect to it, as well as just nutrition. It can have like a dual focus to it. So it's because nutrition is such a social thing, and obviously everyone needs to eat, then you can definitely use those, making it less sort of formal and everyone sits down for a sort of a lecture around nutrition into something more fun and something that they can bond over and really have some fun and enjoyment out of, because as I said, nutrition is a really social thing, as well as just being something purely for performance. So yeah, really like that example.
Another one is maybe adding a section to the newsletter. So just some basic info and ideas on how to improve nutrition.
Yeah, again, really good example there. Especially if it's a newsletter that's maybe targeted more so to not so much the athletes in the clubs, but maybe some of the staff, coordinators and coaches and parents, etc. Particularly parents if it's like development or adolescent athletes, because once they have the information, it's probably more straightforward for them as influencers to sort of apply that knowledge and break it down for the athletes, and sort of drip feed the information to them, as opposed to giving all the information straight to the athletes at once, which again you might have typically looked to run a workshop and give it straight to the athletes. So yeah, really nice example to include it in and not have to reinvent the wheel, and just include it in a newsletter that's already up and running. Really like that example too.
Yeah, and linking on to that, maybe put like a featured recipe or something, or some good idea, like good food ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's
as well.
Definitely, there's various things you can do with it, from little snippets of info to recipe or piece of cooking equipment of the week or month, and then maybe like a Q&A section or a myth busting section around nutrition, because as we know, there can be a lot of noise sometimes out there on social media, and we touched on that a little bit in the last webinar. So it's sometimes difficult to know what information is correct and what is more sort of myth. So yeah, you can definitely do various things various things there, and rely on and obviously lean heavily on the expertise that's available to you within your NGB or within Sport Wales to help you answer some of those.
Yeah. And linking into social media, actually, if the club has a social media, putting some positive food examples on there, or maybe as well the club tuck shop, again, you know, providing some good food examples as well.
Yeah, definitely. If it comes back to sort of consistent messaging, so if you can make or facilitate some way the environment to reinforce the behavior or what's on the newsletter, that can be really impactful in terms of, you know, if they see a granola bar recipe, for example, a really simple one in a newsletter, and then the next day there's an effort made to sort of have those available at the tuck shop as a something like continuous or just a once-off sort of taster session. That's that's really powerful. The more angles that you can come at it from rather than solely information, the better to sort of embed those habits with the athlete and their, you know, training environment moving forward.
Yeah. And then just one more, and I know this is something that you guys try and do as a nutrition team, but engaging with facility providers about healthy options.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
In the cash.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it like I sort of mentioned at the beginning about nutrition being a really, you know, a social thing and something that everyone does. It's not just you know, a purely performance-led thing. There's a strong intrinsic link there to health. So it's all about promoting and facilitating, you know, good food choices for life, not just for sport. And trying to get that message across to your key players at those different facilities. Sometimes it is a bit of a battle, but certainly one that I think is worth pursuing. If you can, you know, even have a small influence, it can be really powerful.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, as I said, if any more come in as we move on, Sarah, feel free to just stop me, or we can pick them up at the end. That's no problem. So just to sort of move on, and we might have touched on a little bit of this already, Sarah, but just to emphasize for those that would come with the idea of having something really practical and take away that they can use in terms of on the left hand side of the screen is probably what most people would associate with the traditional aspects of performance nutrition. So you know, if an athlete isn't having enough five a day or isn't eating enough protein, simply give them a meal plan. Running one-off workshops I've already sort of touched on. Being perceived or being the food police, and putting that sort of negative spin on you know, the restrictive, you know, you shouldn't be eating that, etc., can almost do more harm than good in a lot of instances. I'll go into a little bit more depth on that. And then, one which is more relevant to some sports than others, but that preoccupation with body composition and body image rather than the performance itself. So just to give you some really practical, small, subtle changes to some of these that can be, you know, not a huge amount of resource that you need to invest in it, or big changes that you need to make, but just some, you know, subtle changes that can make a big difference in the long run. So from a, you know, simply providing or signposting to meal plans point of view, the key there is to really understand the individual that you're dealing with. So oftentimes it's just a really, you know, an open conversation or a corridor conversation that you'd normally have with your athlete, whether it's from a coach's point of view, or you know, if it's a parent, again, it's probably something you'll pick up on yourself. But like we said, it's not always the case that the knowledge which you'll give them in a meal plan is actually the issue. They might know exactly what they need to eat for their health and performance. Often it comes back to they just don't have the skill set, so they can't cook, you know, really basic meals. You know, all they've got in their arsenal, for example, is just being able to, you know, make toast and maybe some eggs or something like that, and it's very limited that way. Or it could be the case that their skill set's really good, but the opportunity that they find themselves in, if they've got a really packed training schedule, really doesn't facilitate good nutrition choices. So they know what they should be eating, but for example, the tuck shop at the venue, at the track, is, you know, is only stocked with, say, you know, chocolate bars and crisps, etc., you know, not really performance focused choices. So understanding that and drawing on those key themes from your group of athletes is really key to sort of having a longer term impact than just providing a meal plan. Then with the one-off educational workshops, which is I think quite a common thing where somebody would acquire a nutritionist to come in and earn someone with expertise and just deliver a one-off education piece around nutrition 101 and expect some immediate changes. Something a lot more effective that you can do is more like show and don't just tell. So making it a bit more practical, and I know that filtered into one of the examples you had there, Sarah, about things you can run online and in person. So having a practical element as well as just like an information focus. So, you know, taster sessions, cooking sessions, getting hands-on with food can always be really beneficial, I think. And then, yeah, making it repetitive. So often with one-off workshops, it's a case that, you know, it just doesn't land very well because it happens once a year or maybe twice a year, and then it's forgotten about, whereas it's something that really needs to be like any training skill. So we touched on that in the first webinar, like you wouldn't just tell an athlete to, you know, just pole vault. There's a series of skills and processes that go in behind that, and it's the same with nutrition. You can't just tell them generally that they need to eat these types of things or drink these types of fluids. It needs to be something that's repeated and practiced on a regular basis. And then from the food police point of view, it's really about if you can put a more positive spin on it and be a role model when you're around those athletes. So usually in the training environment, away at competitions, away at training camps, that you are, you know, making those healthy choices yourself, or those performance focused choices yourself when you're in their presence, and having a good dialogue with them about, so they can see and sort of look up to you. And that can be anything from coaches to more senior members of staff or senior athletes that the younger development athletes really look up to. That can be really positive because as you might have seen in the media recently, there's some examples of some really negative examples of where that food police angle, or really being restrictive and negative about what athletes are eating, can really have more maladaptive effects that is really not desirable versus what you're trying to achieve by getting them to eat as healthily as possible. And then the body composition point of view. So yeah, I mean, a nice way to frame this is it would be naive to think that it's not important for athletics, for, you know, a lot of sports in general. There is a big aspect of being in a particular physical condition to be able to, you know, run fast, jump high, you know, just perform at your best. However, often if that's overcooked or overdone and there's too much emphasis placed on that, it can actually have, again, more negative consequences. So they're an athlete thinking about the number they've seen on the scale rather than the time they need to hit, or what's the bigger picture, you know, what's the performance or health consequences at the end of the day are really more important, a lot more important. So it's really, you need to focus more on the health, overall athlete health, and their performance, and body composition should just be really something in the background that is utilized when and if it's appropriate for, you know, performance, and not something that it's, you know, that's the outcome is to be this particular size or shape. I think that's an unrealistic expectation and something that's not really backed by science, as opposed to just what's, you know, culturally embedded in some of the different sports that we work with. So I might circle back to some of these examples as I move through. Sorry. So yeah, just to go through the model that we showed at the beginning in terms of the, you know, the different strands and what you can practically sort of look to do to address some of these things. So from a capability point of view, the psychological or knowledge base. So there's lots of things rather than just running those one-off workshops. There's things like, you know, signposting to online recipe tutorials, following that up with, you know, here's where you can have a recipe box delivered with some really simple instructions. So, you know, a dual focus to that sort of intervention if that's what you think the main limitation to that athlete's performance is. From a hydration point of view, you can give them information there in terms of, you know, what your urine color should look like for optimal hydration. And then you can use different apps like MyFitnessPal, or that specific example I think is Waterlogged. So a free app that you can download, and it will prompt you and give you some indication of how much you should be drinking, and incentivize those good habits if you're, you know, drinking enough throughout the day, because often it's just something that athletes will not be too aware of, and they'll just forget to do it. So that can be really helpful. Again, a knowledge basis underpinning it. And then again, it depends on your situation. If there is food available at the venue, or if it's a training camp or competition, is that at the, if there's a buffet available, or you're out to eat at a restaurant with the athletes, having a conversation about the food, and about building like a balanced plate with adequate carbohydrate for fuel, protein for recovery, and fruit and veg for to support health and immunity. That can be really impactful versus just giving them an infographic, or giving them some general information about what they need to do. So you can use both together. And that sort of leads nicely on to, from a Sport Wales point of view, and this would go really across all the boards, is this performance meal wheel around a balanced plate in terms of like the knowledge basis for athletes. This underpins everything that we do and we want to achieve. So it's that balance between your recovery-based proteins and fats, your fuel, which is your carbohydrates, and what do those look like, and what sort of portion sizes you need on different days for different training sessions. And then everyone knows well about the 5 or 7 a day, if possible, fruit and veg to support your health and immune system, and the hydration. So that's a key resource. It's available on the Welsh Athletics website for anyone that's interested, and we'll be able to signpost to it as well at the end of the webinar. And also you've got, a nice example from a different sport about, providing them with some information. Again, this was a nice example from the newsletter example you mentioned, Sarah. So something that you can prompt before a training camp or a competition to say, these are some nice examples, give them some knowledge around what does a fuel snack look like, what does a recover snack look like, non-perishable foods for the most part that can be, packed. And the parent can hopefully facilitate, if it's a younger athlete, to help them along with some of this. So that again, from a knowledge point of view, can be really useful. And then the other aspect of capability is obviously the physical skills. So that's the athletes themselves being able to plan and prepare their own meals. And as I sort of touched on earlier, this is very much a lifestyle thing rather than just something for performance. Like basic cooking skills is something that we often learn as children or adolescents, or pick up as we move into university life, etc. So the earlier you can start with these types of, really simple interventions, taster sessions, and then moving on to some more technical like kitchen coaching or cooking sessions, that can be really great. Not just from a nutrition point of view, but also from like a team bonding point of view, as a point was raised earlier. It's usually like a nice, fun, competitive environment sometimes for the athletes to thrive in, and really pick up some basic life skills that they can take, not just through their careers, but also beyond into their general life. So that's a really nice example of some things you can run on a really basic level, where you don't need a really fancy kitchen to do. Sometimes it's just you can do it on a smaller scale, and I can go into that a bit more at the Q&A at the end if anyone's got any questions on maybe some of the technicalities of how you might run something like that. Moving on then to opportunity. So this is really around, first of all, the physical environment. So what we say as a nutrition team is it's really important, if possible, that the environment reinforces the behavior that you're trying to achieve. So if you as a coach think it's really key for an athlete to recover appropriately and get a nice hit of protein in after a heavy S&C session or a throw session, having a recovery fridge with some milkshakes or yogurts, something with a high protein focus in the environment, just to make it really easy, make the right choice, the easy choice for the athlete, as you can see on the left there. That's a really good example of an intervention you can think about. One from the Sport Wales environment, where the healthier vending initiative that was set up by my colleague Olivia. So this again is just incentivizing that good choice is easy to facilitate in the environment. So changing those less performance focused choices to something that's going to be better, not only just for their performance, but just general health. Yeah, in a training environment, if there's some sort of buffet or cafe, can you have like a nice vibrant salad bar in the eye line as the athlete walks in? So again, it's easy for them, and it's obvious that, you know, this is the choice I should be making. Whereas on the left, you might see a practical example. Actually, couldn't say which event, but like again, you can have the opposite. It can be a barrier if, you know, there is a fish and chip shop or some sort of takeaway restaurant invisible in the environment, or, you know, in close proximity, where it's easier to make, you know, a less performance focused choice. Not to say that now and again, as anyone would have a, you know, a treat meal, but if it's something that's habitually there in the environment, it's probably in the long run going to cost you in terms of those you know, desired nutrition behaviors and habits you want. So yeah, just a point to make on this is it's often something that's really, it's difficult to control. Sometimes it's out of your control as a coach or a parent when you're sending your athletes into these environments, that what's available is often out of your control. So we appreciate the limitations there. It is a challenge. So it's really just looking for those small wins, and where you might be able to influence on these various things. Can be, you know, even really small changes can have really long-term implications when they're, you know, repeated and done consistently. Oops, sorry. And then the other side of opportunity then is more from the social reinforcement. So like we mentioned, around it's more the peer group that facilitates, you know, eating in the particular context of that physical environment. So really important from a consistent language and messaging point of view in your training group, so that everyone's on that same page around, you know, the positive, as much as possible, the positive messages and the value that food can add to performance. So if it's for example, and this is just one example, there's various different platforms that people use if they have groups of athletes, you know, different training groups, is if it's on a WhatsApp forum, for example, is that reminders around, you know, everyone bringing their own water bottle to a session, or bringing particular snacks like we mentioned earlier, just reinforcing those sort of key bits of info that you want to be repeated, and positivity and praise around, you know, good habits, as opposed to like we mentioned before, if it's more from the restrictive food police point of view, that often results in more resistance and negativity than what you're trying to achieve. And then also under the social reinforcement banner is, you know, to consider your role from a coach parent point of view as an influencer, as an athlete, particularly like a head coach parent. They're going to look up to you as their source of not only information, but from a role modeling point of view. So yeah, just not to draw too much attention to the rewards. Don't reward yourself with food. You're not a dog. What we more so mean by that is it's absolutely fine, and we all do it as practitioners, coaches, athletes. You know, it's fine to have treats now and again, or to go out for really nice social meals. That's absolutely not what we're discouraging. It's more rewarding in terms of, you know, if there's a chip ban or something habitually in the environment, that you're using that as a source of motivation for the training session, and the athlete starts to associate that, you know, reward of that less, you know, health and performance focused food with just showing up and completing a training session. That's probably not what you want in the long run. You want the athlete obviously to be internally motivated, to just because of their love for the sport, to show up and try and perform as best they can, and for it to be an inclusive and positive environment for them to be in. So yeah, it's more so just to consider that, consider the choices you make, and the you know, how you facilitate certain situations. As much as possible, you want it to be in there for them to be internally motivated, and then thinking outside the box with other external motivators other than just, you know, fast food that they can, you know, have as rewards or prizes for, you know, doing particularly well in a training block, or hitting a PB, or whatever it may be, really. So if anyone has any, you know, outside the box suggestions or thoughts on that, I'm happy to hear them as we move through, or at the end. And then the last pillar of the two, so we've discussed capability around their skills and knowledge, the opportunity around the environment that they find themselves in and their social circles. And then really the main pillar, which is more, athlete focused or from their own point of view, really, is their own motivation. And this can often be the pillar that the behavior falls down on. So obviously there's two aspects to it. There's reflective, which is more so when they think back and proactively plan around their nutrition. What's the thought process behind it? What's their beliefs about their ability to, prepare and eat this particular food that you're asking them to eat, or fluid. And then automatic is more, again, we discussed around the emotional side of things, how they feel about food, what are their, emotional responses to different scenarios, and how does, their food and nutrition fit into those situations. So I'll just go through them in a bit more detail. So on the left is more the reflective side of things. So what you can do as an influencer on the athlete is more sell the why. So linking it with what their goals are as an athlete, because oftentimes athletes just don't associate it nutrition. They just don't see the value in it, and they think, it's not something I really need to prioritize. Other things are more important. So it's selling the why if you can, in terms of, if you don't eat protein and consistently do that, these are the implications in terms of, muscle mass. The other athletes that are doing it are going to be, advancing and progressing in the strength area. And there's nice, articles and examples of role models of other athletes that you can use to sort of back up your points there. Also on the reflective side is encouraging their beliefs. So yeah, again, trying to motivate them and encourage their own capabilities to fulfill those goals. So praising them when they, have reminders set to, bring their own water bottle, the snacks, even the really small, maybe you would say insignificant habits, but over time can really add up to altering the core biochemistry and also just their general mood in training. So yeah, trying to encourage their beliefs around what they can do, what they can achieve from a nutrition point of view. And then more automatic is, again, it's more like what happens in the moment and the emotional responses. So from your point of view, as particularly, I guess, coaches, but also parents, facilitators, and athletes to other athletes, is language is really key. So trying to move away from the, what's good or bad in terms of food, or what's clean, and this type of language, which is can sometimes be more mal-responsive and a negative connotation with it. It's more around what's a more nutrient dense choice and what's less nutrient dense, or what's more impactful for your performance and less so. Because with food is food, and there are times when treats and different meals are appropriate. It's not necessarily that they're bad foods, it's just what's going to benefit you as a habit for those good performances with that good nutrition underpinning it. And then we spoke about it, I touched on it a little bit earlier, around the body weight side of things. So trying to de-emphasize that as your key performance indicator. It's more about what's the performance, and where then does, if body weight is really important to that, where does it fit in, and how can we focus on the the key behaviors, and not just focus purely on a number on a scale, or on tracking skin folds, etc. And the last one, again, links back to the social side. So as you can see, there's often some crossover between the pillars: motivation, capability, opportunity. So this links again to the social opportunity. So you being a role model and encouraging your senior athletes, or more high profile Commonwealth, Olympic standard, or national level, if you've got them in your club training environment, encouraging those athletes to role model. And we've seen some nice examples of athletes doing YouTube series around their own cooking skills, and promoting positive messaging around the value of nutrition and how it's helped them in their careers, from a young development athlete right to winning those medals on the world stage, or on the the national stage. So that can be really powerful. There's some nice research to show that athletes are definitely heavily influenced by what they see their key peers and role models doing on, like, social media, even, for example. and definitely what they do in the training environment is going to filter down to what they're trying to achieve themselves. So yeah, probably a lot to take in with that one. But if anyone needs me to circle back to any of these points, hopefully it's starting to you're starting to build a picture yourselves in terms of how those three, the athlete's own motivation, and then their capability, which is their skills and knowledge, and the opportunity, which is more the environment and the social side of things, how it all links together, and where your low-hanging fruit is. Like, what do you see in terms of this really helps us? We've got a really key, role model as an athlete, but our environment maybe isn't up to scratch. So just, yeah, examples like that. We'll try and get some examples and reflect a little bit on this at the end of the webinar, hopefully. Yeah, so for now, if you can, just again, I'll allow a few minutes, again, just using the question and chat box function. If you can think of if there are any possible solutions or ideas that you, in your role in your club or training environment, to think about bringing back, following sort of what we've discussed. So are there any, it's more really from the barriers point of view, what do you see as, what's the low-hanging fruit to tackle, and what we can use, or what sort of strategies you might think about using in future to sort of tackle some of these issues and hopefully create some sustainable change with a training group or an individual athlete. So I'll just allow, if anyone's got anything to comment on or any suggestions there, I'll just leave the questions chat box open for a couple of minutes. And hopefully Sarah can feed anything in, or if there's anything that's come in during the presentation there, Sarah.
Nothing's come in during the presentation, but we'll just give them a couple of minutes to see if any answers or suggestions come up. So one idea that's come up is to maybe make some healthy snacks for the training group to try.
Yeah, very, very nice example. So that's again appealing to the show don't tell aspect that we brought up earlier in terms of the social opportunity point of view. So giving them a taster session and showing them and explaining to them, I guess, while they're tasting them, how easy it was or how practical it was to make these snacks, and then they'll associate the good, the nice taste and the positive sort of mood response that they get from maybe eating those, if it's like healthy flapjacks or something like that, with a good training session. They might subjectively feel better after the session, and then it's a nice positive feedback loop to then hopefully asking for the recipe or trying to make the bars themselves next time. Taster sessions are really good and can be definitely impactful.
And following on from that, linking to what you just said, maybe then posting the recipe in say a WhatsApp group if they've got a training WhatsApp group. So for example, like you said, flapjacks, granola bars.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's again linking back to with the reinforcement of the behaviour, so trying to make it as easy, as obvious, and as I guess desirable as possible. So yeah, having it there on their phone in a WhatsApp group, as opposed to a piece of paper that they might put in the bottom of their kit bag and it gets lost or it gets torn. Just thinking those even small things like that can have a big impact. So yeah, having it in a WhatsApp group can be great, and they can use that as a point of reference, and it's just one click of a button away when they fancy trying it themselves at home.
Another great example, maybe the senior athletes at the club sharing some healthy recipes.
Yeah,
potentially on the club social media, or actually just again when they're at training.
Yeah, absolutely. And often when it seems like less engineered, when it's maybe not a recipe that is really obviously come from a nutritionist, that's probably a really powerful example when the athlete just off their own back comes up with something themselves, and showcases the benefits that it's not only good for their performance, but it tastes good, and this is the type of food that they enjoy eating on a daily basis, or something that they batch cook for the week. That's definitely really impactful to filter down to the more development athletes that are following them on social media. That can be really great.
And then maybe again, another example, maybe having a think around healthy choices to have in a tuck shop, and again talking to the athletes and getting them involved in terms of if there was going to be some healthy choices and some good food examples, kind of what sorts of things would appeal to them to be in the tuck shop.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really nice point actually, Sarah, around more the autonomy of the athletes themselves. So if we just as people think ourselves, we generally we don't like to be lectured to or feel like we're being told or that choices are being forced upon us. So the more you can give athletes, give them a voice in what's happening, and say, like exactly like you said, we're thinking of including some more health and performance focused choices in the tuck shop. What types of things have you seen on social media? What might you like to see here? It's much more likely then that they're going to, purchase those things, as opposed to, if they feel like it's, something that you've forced upon them, they can often just rebel against that, and the desired outcome is lost on them. So that's really good if you can have them involved in the process as much as possible. That's great.
Yeah, increase their buy-in, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So I'll just, if any more trickle in, Sarah, and we can sort of circle back to them at the end, but I'll just move on now to just really a take-home messaging slide. So something that we discussed in part one for any of you who are returning from that session, around just how complex, and again, a lot of what we discussed today will be that, where you might have thought just about, give them information and expect them to change. It's usually just that, the physiology, what they need to do, how much grams of carbohydrate they need to eat, how much fluid they need to drink. But as you can see with the infographic, it's really complex. And as humans, because we eat habitually, whether we're athletes or not, there's so much that goes into it, from the taste point of view, our lifestyle, how our relationship might impact on it. From a socioeconomic point of view, what's the athlete's budget like? Like, are the recipes that you are suggesting, are they budget friendly for the athlete? Because if not, it's probably something that definitely won't land for them if they feel like it's outside of their price range or too many ingredients. So really lots to consider with it. Nice sort of, if anyone would like to screenshot this or just take some notes, on the left hand side it's about understanding the individual or the group and what themes you're seeing in terms of their dietary behaviors. Identifying in the training environment, that's really what you have more control over, and maybe less so than what they do at home and what they do in their spare time and at competitions. At least in the training environment, what are the barriers to you seeing those good behaviors? And then as part of that, who are the key influencers, and what are the key influencers on those things? Is it the senior athletes, like we spoke about? Is it the head coach, and what they see the coaching staff doing, or the messaging that's being reinforced from that point of view? That's really key, and it's a nice sort of timeline to follow and think about as you move back to slowly as we return to training now, hopefully. What you can pick up on and see, hear and feel in the environment. And then lastly, I'll just leave it open to for a couple of minutes to any questions that anyone's got around any of the content in this part of the series or part one. And then I will also just finish on a signposting slide, because I'm aware from part one of the series that a lot of you were curious to sort of know where to go to look for that, evidence-based or, the key nutrition messages that you want to, have available for your athletes. So I've got a slide at the very end just to highlight some of those websites and social media pages. But in the meantime, as I said, if anyone's got any questions now that they'd like to ask, or if you'd like to not ask it on this forum, you can see at the bottom right there, as a nutrition team at Sport Wales, we're happy to take any questions or case studies that you've got yourselves. So it's performance.nutrition@sport.wales. If you'd like to, email them in as opposed to put them in the chat box here. So I'll just give it a couple of minutes on the question front, just to give people a chance to type in anything they've got.
We've got a question come in.
Okay, shoot.
So the question is, how can you best influence parents to make the right choices, as they're often the ones buying the food?
Yeah, it's a good point, and definitely something that's common, I think, probably across the board. So generally, it's often with parents. It's more so what we discussed about the education with the athletes, but obviously sometimes it is actually a barrier, not with the athletes but the parents around the education, so that they just don't know or they're not aware of what choices they should be providing, what snacks they should be packing. So that's probably the first point that I would look to sort of try and dig a bit deeper into. Is it a knowledge problem with the parents, or is it more so, is it something else? Because usually from experience it would be trying to disseminate that info to them, targeting them with those key things like newsletters, social media pages, websites, and emails in advance of camps and stuff, so that they know, what the expectations are, for them to, provide their kids with the appropriate nutrition choices. So yeah, that would usually be first port of call, is to try and assess, is it a knowledge problem first of all, and what you can do to rectify that if possible. Well, just as we're waiting, I'll leave it open for a few more questions, but I'll just leave it as well on this slide in terms of the signposting and what we touched on in webinar number 1. So if you are looking for, we've broken it down into sections there. So if you're really interested in recipe ideas, there's some examples there, websites, just general Q&A, or myth busting. If you're looking specifically for sport nutrition and not public health nutrition info, there's some nice websites and performance focused areas there. Supplements question came up in the last webinar, so if anyone's got a specific supplement question that they need more information on, and if you need or looking for a freelance professional to work with your club or a particular outfit, there's some info there at the bottom as well. And just to highlight again, the Welsh Athletics website has the resources, some of the ones that we showed today, so around the meal wheel, and a few of those other infographics and images you might have seen. They're available on welshathletics.org.
We've just had another question come through, Eoghan. So the question is, how do you approach a situation where an athlete is routinely making bad nutrition choices without making it negative?
Yeah, very good question. I would say it's best to sort of, obviously if you've got a really good relationship with the athlete, it makes it easier than if you're new into the environment. But if you know the athlete well, it's about having that like really probably informal conversation, not make it too clinical and feel like they're being assessed or being grilled. Just have a corridor conversation. Just say you've noticed that some of their choices maybe aren't the best for their performance goal. Again, going away from the areas of body composition, etc. And then if they come up with some examples of, well, it's for these reasons, or if, again, that's where you unpick, is it a knowledge problem that they just don't know, they weren't aware that they weren't making good choices, or is it more that they know exactly what they should be eating, but they just, for whatever reason, they can't, their home environment is a limitation, or what you're providing or what's available near the training or in the training environment, that's a limitation. So it's really about understanding the individual first before jumping to conclusions and putting that sort of negative spin or sort of chastising them for those bad choices. Good point. Good point to start on is just to have an informal conversation and try and unpick some of those, athlete experiences, and decide if you're the right person to do that, or somebody that has maybe a better relationship with the athlete themselves can facilitate or help you with that discussion. That's also a good piece of advice, I think.
Yeah, and then just another one that's popped in. Is it useful for athletes to keep food diaries?
Okay, yeah, good question. I would say the context is it can be a useful tool for some athletes who are really driven by detail and numbers and stuff. They can really find benefit from like a self-awareness point of view, from tracking what they're eating and keeping a food diary, a food log. There's apps that will help you do that. You've got MyFitnessPal and a few others, or you can just scribble it down. So definitely it can be. I'd say it's more of usually a short-term approach. It's probably not something they'll be able to sustain long-term. But yeah, it definitely can be good just from an awareness point of view, that they can as part of that reflective motivation, they can look back and think, actually, looking back at that week, when I'm not just mindlessly eating, I am actually probably could make better choices on these days, or I could have done something differently here. And yeah, if you have the expertise of a nutritionist or dietitian working with you to, give them feedback on that, that's going to be really critical, as opposed to them just trying to analyze it themselves. But from an awareness point of view, it can be a good thing for an athlete to do for a short period of time.
Brilliant. And then just one final question. How do you approach a situation where an athlete is using supplements over food? For example, maybe protein shakes.
Yeah, really good question, and something that probably crops up more than probably people think. So it's often just, again, a conversation and an awareness point of view is the three areas that we want the athlete to think about and sort of get them ask those curious questions. Is first of all, why a protein shake over these protein sources in food? Like it might be a taste preference for the athlete. It might be a convenience thing for the athlete. There's various things there that you might be able to unpick, or it might just be the case that they didn't know, and this you'd be surprised how often this happens. They didn't know that a chicken breast had the same amount of protein, like good quality protein, as a scoop of whatever they're taking. So always that, think about, can you get this from food, or is it a case that you know that you can get it from food and there's a different reason? And then it's more into where there's a link to UCAD. There is the need and the consequences and the risks around supplement taking. So that's a behavior change technique in itself, salience of consequences. So making them aware of what can go wrong if they're if there's a long-term habit for them to use supplements, because there's risks, as we know, there's risks involved with any supplement practices. So yeah, making them aware around batch testing, and if they're on a tested program, that what are the consequences if things go wrong and if there's a contamination. So yeah, that would be the two main points I'd say takeaways. First of all, assess the reason behind why they're taking it. What's the need? Are they aware that they can get it from food, or is there a different reason? And then the salience and consequences around the risk and the ban that they can get if they're using supplements carelessly, I guess.
Wonderful. Well, that's all the questions that have been posted.
Cool. Yeah, I think we've just about hit 8 o'clock now. So yeah, I'm happy to leave it open for as long as or a few more minutes at least, just in case anyone else would like to ask anything, or if people just want to take as I said, snapshot of the signposting information here that we've got around where to look for good quality nutrition info.
Yeah, and they can always, if they re-listen to this webinar and have a question, they can always ping you guys an email on the performance.nutrition@sport.wales.
Yeah,
email.
Absolutely. Yeah, so the email address is there at the bottom in blue, just above the Welsh Athletics site. So if anyone's got a question, feel free to email us in. And yeah, also that's a good point, Sarah, that this webinar should be available in the near future, hopefully next week, on the Welsh Athletics YouTube channel, as well as part 1. So if anyone wants to watch back part 1 to get context of what we've gone through today, or both parts together, feel free to do so, and then come back to us if you've got any questions or thoughts or feedback. That would be really great.